Good evening, ladies and gentlemen out there in front of your computer screens, on your mobile phones, or whatever. Welcome to the Matura Express. My name is Karina, and I have the pleasure tonight to talk with you or to you about ethnic minorities. Okay, so as you saw in the insert, ethnic minorities are tonight's topic. But I have extended the plan a little bit. As you can see, it says today's plan. I'll quickly talk you through what's on the schedule tonight. Some vocabulary and some concepts that might prove useful for you in order to be able to talk about ethnic minorities, immigration, emigration on a larger scale kind of belongs together. So I'll try and give you some vocab. As always, those of you who tune in more frequently know that I'm a big fan of giving you unit vocabulary to work with. There's also some concepts on how to deal with, but there are some concepts out there on how to make the step to include an ethnic minority into the society, into the host country's society. I'll try and explain these to you. There's a couple of pictures because I think they're it's easier to explain them using pictures. I will then tell you something about how to describe visuals, or how I would describe visuals, or I'll talk you through the strategy that I use basically. Last week's stream was about how to interpret graphs and statistics, so line graphs, bar charts, and whatever. Tonight I'll talk about how to interpret photographs, cartoons, so visuals other than statistics. Maybe, I don't know, a little nicer because you have a bit more flexibility in terms of vocabulary. You don't really need to know all those terms that describe the movement of graphs and charts. So you're a bit more flexible in that sense. I'll then show you a photograph and a cartoon that I will try to describe to you, basically applying the strategies that I talked you through. So kind of putting it into practice. Good. So first off, where did my vocab go? There we go. Well, ethnic minorities are a quite broad topic, really. It involves many things. Or ethnic minorities do kind of englobe the topic of immigration, emigration. It also definitely contains the topic of ethnic minorities in Austria, which would to a large extent concern countries like Carinthia, for example, where there is an ethnic minority population that is quite strong. You may have followed the discussions a couple of years ago. Oh well, maybe you're too young for that. But in some parts of Carinthia there still is an ongoing discussion about whether or not to have bilingual road signs and stuff. That's basically a right that the ethnic minorities, or the Slovenian ethnic minority, claims there. So ethnic minorities is also a issue that is interesting or important within Austria. Then it's about immigration, emigration, as I said before. So it's a quite wide topic, and that's why I thought I'd try and give you as many words as possible to enable you to talk about as many aspects as possible in your exams, whatever, depending on what the task looks like. As always, I try to pick some vocab that either is a little bit tricky in terms of word formation, or words that I know or that experience has taught me are difficult to come up with in a speaking situation or in an exam situation. So yeah, as always, I'll try and give you a couple of seconds to think about the words before I'll write them down without all too many spelling mistakes, I hope. So first one sounds easy, but then The Ausland sometimes does cause problems because for some strange reason people sometimes treat it as if it was a country and use articles and all kind of fancy things with it, treating it as if it was a noun, which it isn't. So, any ideas for Ausland? From abroad. Abroad is not a country, so please do not apply any articles to it. Usually, or people tend to say, I don't know, go to the abroad, which doesn't really make sense. So it's only from abroad. It would also be ins Ausland gehen would be to go abroad. No articles, no prepositions, no nothing necessary. Then ethnic minorities. Probably did talk about the problems of ethnic minorities. One of the problems that ethnic minorities very frequently face is discrimination because of their Hautfarbe. And Hautfarbe would be skin color. Titeldesign verwenden. Why does my R not work? Skin color or color of someone's skin would also work if you were kind of trying to, I don't know, amplify the concept a little bit or use a metaphor instead of only skin color. Convictions is a harder word to spell. So sometimes people also get discriminated against because of the religion they believe in. So their religious convictions sometimes do pose a problem. Conviction is the English word for Überzeugung. So yeah, it's something that sometimes causes discrimination and harassment from people in the so-called host countries. Host countries, one of the terms that has made it into the media quite frequently thanks to Donald Trump. He would always say, well, America is basically the greatest host country in the world, giving so and so many benefits to their ethnic minorities. Well, you probably did talk about the concept of homogeneous and heterogeneous societies. There are societies where there are not that many ethnic minorities. Holds true for many Asian countries, China, for example, a very homogeneous society where there are not that many people from foreign countries. And if there are, they come from like neighboring states and very frequently come for work, so it would be work migration. Many people are planning on going back in such countries. Homogeneous societies are countries where, as I said, there are not that many ethnic minorities, and therefore they do not really have to like try and find ways on how to like live together. I don't know. Whereas in heterogeneous societies, it's basically the opposite. That is nations where there is and always was a lot of migration going on. A very good example of a heterogeneous society would be America, a country with a very, very long history of migration, immigration, emigration as well. So America would be a very heterogeneous society, a fact that the Americans tend to forget nowadays, or every now and then sometimes. So America was, like, you know, there was people from Great Britain, there was people from India, there was people from Ireland, there was people from Italy. So it's one of those societies that is very, very heterogeneous. So America is a country that knows a lot about ethnic minorities, about Mexicans nowadays. Also a lot of immigration from Latin American countries in general. So homogeneous societies versus heterogeneous societies. It's always a concept of like how much immigration do we get and how well can we cope with it, really, at the end of the day. The next one is a word that you may know, but that sometimes causes problems in terms of pronunciation. So if you have prejudice against someone, and please bear in mind the pronunciation of the words of the word. I've heard a lot of many like weird ways of pronouncing it. Prejudice, Vorurteile. So what you basically think about a person after having known this person, him or her, for only a very short period of time, sometimes also simply upon sight. So we tend to form prejudice about people. It's this very nice saying, don't judge a book by its covers, which is what we sometimes do. So we see a person and we make assumptions on his or her character simply by judging, I don't know, appearance, clothes, hairstyle, way of talking, way of walking, whatever. Stereotypes is basically the same word in English. My mouse has gone away. There we go. My computer skills are fantastic. Okay. Well, it's the same word it's basically the same word as in German. The difference between the prejudice and the stereotype is that stereotypes are a broader concept, so we tend to have stereotypes not so much about single persons, but about whole countries, whole nationalities. So all the Germans are blah, 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 and people in, I don't know, Switzerland are blah, blah, blah. The Polish are like this and that. So we give them adjectives, we ascribe character traits to them that we think are true for like a whole society. So prejudice are usually based upon one person, judging by the looks, and stereotypes are based on what we think we know about a country. Yeah, and then we make our assumptions and kind of apply those assumptions to like a whole nation at the end of the day. So one of the concepts in like the treatment of ethnic minorities or the treatment in immigration is the concept of complete like Ausgrenzung. So host country does not want to do anything with the newcomers, basically. The political term, even though there are more, of course, would be segregation. So segregation is a political term for like deliberately excluding a whole group of people. Would, for example, be the case in some countries where there are strict divisions in school, for example. We still find that in some parts of Australia, for example, where there are schools for like the native Australians, the inhabitants that were there before the British came, and the white Australians. So segregation in school would be we separate the natives from the locals. Same holds true for Africa, South Africa in some parts. Schools for black kids and schools for white kids. We still have that every now and then. So segregation would be like keep them apart. Einwanderung would be immigration, so people coming to a host country for different reasons, be it for work, be it for security, be it for protection, be it for money, whatever. So immigration is Einwanderung, whereas emigration is if people leave their home countries. So the act of leaving is called to emigrate. What is missing here is maybe the more general concept. It is migration is basically just simply moving around, so not settling down in one country, but being willing and being free to like move around a little bit and leave one country and move to another one for work purposes, for example. Well, a very, like probably one of the words that you all know. In the past there have been a lot of protests. What do I want? Is that your German insert?
Could be, yeah. Yeah.
That's what you get for clicking on Einfügen. There we go. So now we had a very short excursion into interpreting text in German. I hope this was helpful. Well, those of you who have been following the whole refugee crisis, which is probably one of the worst words ever, there's been protests going on in favor of refugees, and a lot of the posters said something like "refugees welcome." That's why we all know the word. So a refugee or refugees is the word for people who are coming from another country in order to seek shelter in Austria, Germany, wherever. Then Staatsbürgerschaft, citizenship, all those infamous citizenship tests for people from other ethnic backgrounds. Well, many countries do them. I think Austria does it as well. So does England. So, yeah. A word that for some random reason sometimes causes problems, probably because it's got many syllables fewer than the German version. So Rassismus would be racism and no other versions possible. Some or a lot of immigrants come for, well, that moment when, come for work. So they contribute their workforce, their Arbeitskraft to the host country, which is definitely one of the benefits of like living in a multicultural society, in a society where there are a lot of ethnic minorities. Gastarbeiter, I think the word or the German word doesn't have, or the connotations that the German word has are not that good anymore. Also, I've heard the English word is quite neutral, so Gastarbeiter are guest workers, which is kind of, there's no real coloring to it. You may have heard, but it's a concept as well, you can like translate it literally, Parallelgesellschaften are parallel societies. There's always been a discussion going on how to deal with ethnic minorities within one country. Opponents of the idea of like having ethnic minorities in a country or giving them rights or whatever usually say that they tend to form parallel societies, so they live their lives among their ethnic minority and do not tend to integrate or do not tend to have the wish to integrate really, which would mean that they kind of, I don't know, follow their old traditions of housing and language and so on and so forth, regardless of what the host country or the majority of the people does. A point of criticism usually, especially when it comes to language, because ethnic minorities, bigger ethnic minorities, are usually criticized for not speaking the language of the host country that well and communicate in their own mother tongues, instead of encouraging the usage of the language of the host country. Also, the concept of the parallel societies also holds true for the areas where they live in. Opponents tend to use the word ghettos for the zones or the districts where the ethnic minorities live. So the parallel societies are kind of like an ethnic minority within a country, the people of which don't really want to adapt or don't really see the need to adapt. And that's something that they get criticized for, or that they are criticized for. Why does my computer make strange noises? In any case, that was the vocab section. Let's have a quick look at them once again. I'll show you the words for a second. You may want to jot them down. Try and remember them. So, abroad without any articles, religious convictions. Vorurteile, important for the pronunciation, prejudice. Segregation, immigration, emigration, migration, like moving around. Refugees, citizenship, racism, workforce, guest workers. And the parallel societies. and the homogeneous and the heterogeneous societies. Both interesting concepts from a current point, like from a current standpoint. As I said, there are societies who don't really get that much immigration and then would not really understand the arguments that most European countries have brought forward when it was like the time to talk about the refugee crisis. It's quite interesting to read the newspapers all over the world. Homogeneous societies tend to underestimate, I guess, the challenges or not really understand them. They usually don't interfere in the whole discussion. So it's quite interesting to read up on what's going on in this discussion. Okay, oh yeah. There is two more concepts that you may have come across while studying for the topic, or that you will come across when doing so. Basically, the opposite of homogeneous society would be the so-called melting pot countries. In Europe, it is usually England that is the prime example of such a melting pot country, and London the prime example of a melting pot city, simply meaning that there's a lot of ethnic minorities within one country in like very limited space. When it comes to England, especially in the Greater London area, there's not that many ethnic minorities the further up north you travel. But so close to the Scottish border, this would maybe not apply so much. But in the Greater London area or in cities like Birmingham, Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, you definitely get so-called melting pot cities in that case, simply meaning that there's a lot of ethnic minorities living together and living together quite well, really. So there's no discussions going on about what language to use and which language to write the road signs in. So I guess the common agreement is that everything is in English, and that at home everyone can speak the language he or she wants to speak. So melting pot countries are sometimes used as the models for like cases where integration has worked very well. In case you don't know much about England, this may be worth doing some research on. As England had a lot of colonies in its history, there's still a good many nations that are like guaranteed English citizenship whenever they want to, in this case, immigrate into the country. Many people have done so. There's a lot of there's ethnic minorities from Africa. There's a huge Indian ethnic minority. There's Jamaicans. There's Africans. So there's people with all different skin colors and all different ethnic backgrounds living in such melting pot countries. As I said, within Europe, it would probably England that can serve as, the prime example of such immigration. Spain maybe to some extent, because in its history, Spain did get a lot of immigration from other countries as well. And they still do have some possessions in Africa as well. So Spain would maybe work as an example as well, France as well. Usually it's the bigger cities that attract ethnic minorities and therefore are the examples for this concept. As I said, if you want to mention it, I would mention London because they're a prime example within Europe. And something that was, or as some people say, would be the perfect situation of integration of ethnic minorities into a country. To assimilate someone means to adapt, sich anpassen, but to a very, very, very big extent. So to assimilate would be basically you adopt our traditions and our language and our customs, and you are like us, kind of. How would you translate assimilation into German? Assimilation. Same word. Well, look it up in the dictionaries. So assimilation is what some people thought in the past. I think it's a bit, well, it's not that fashionable anymore, this way of thinking or this approach to immigration or this approach to ethnic minorities. Assimilation was seen as the perfect example of how an ethnic minority can be included into a country, as I said, by adopting traditions, by adopting language. Language always plays a vital role in like the whole ethnic minority discussion, always has and always will, I guess, as language always functions as some kind of status symbol, some identity, like it gives you identity as well. So assimilation was the approach that was basically looked for in a society. We assimilate to the way of life that you have, and that's the best thing because it doesn't really cause any problems then. But I don't know, it always works, or it always worked in history. It's a different story. So we call assimilation simply Anpassung, just for the sake of having it done. There we go. So, as some of you may find it easier to remember concepts or like theoretical background like this by being shown some images, here we have the classic 4 examples of how to integrate ethnic minorities into their respective host countries. So if there is an ethnic minority in a country, how can they be included, integrated into the host country's society? There's 4 concepts that are out there. They were originally done for the inclusion of ethnic minorities in school. So this picture was, or the idea behind it was to show how foreigners can be dealt with in a classroom. It was then extended and kind of tried to find the best approach in societies, in workplaces and so on as well. So what some countries do, I guess, is to like completely exclude ethnic minorities, which would probably lead to what I mentioned earlier, to those parallel societies. So exclusion would be we have the host country in the middle, or the people of the host country in the middle, and all the ethnic minorities. Doesn't only have to be one, can be any, really. All those ethnic minorities kind of live around the host society in kind of like satellite societies. Has proven to be a quite bad concept, really, because to exclude, as I said, leads to parallel societies where everyone like does his or her own thing, follows customs, speaks the language, like their own language, but doesn't really want to, or can't really, because there's no chance to do so, learn the host country's language to such an extent that you can, like, then on a larger scale, get access to the, what they call job market. There we go. Well, not such a hard word. So exclusion, there was this approach. I think it's a very outdated approach, but we saw that sometimes, especially in countries like Latin America, where the conquerors, so those people who kind of conquered the island and kind of Christianized them, really long story. But it was basically the indigenous population versus the new population, was definitely a situation of exclusion. So the one excluded the other. Didn't really work. As I said, the satellite societies didn't integrate. So exclusion, I guess, is an outdated model on how to deal with ethnic minorities. Then we have integration, which is probably the word that is most frequently used also in the media. If you talk about the refugee crisis, if you talk about ethnic minorities in basically whichever country you want to, people tend to talk about integration and how integration has failed, or the media try to give us examples where integration has gone perfectly right. But still, the concept of integration basically says that there's a large pool of like the natives to the country and they integrate the newcomers, they integrate the ethnic minorities, but then they still stay together as a group. So basically the only difference is that they're not excluded anymore, but kind of part of society. They do have access to schools, they do have access to workplaces and so on and so forth, but then they still stay in their community a lot and still speak their own languages, follow their own customs very much. So it's basically a group of like one ethnic minority that is part of the whole thing in certain areas, but then still very much, well, among themselves, really. Then we have separation, where it's two totally different things. I think it very much ties up to exclusion. To separate someone and to exclude someone is not much of a difference, really, at the end of the day. So the ethnic minority deliberately forms one group, whereas the host country or the native people form another, and there's like a strict separation of the two in many different aspects. Usually we talk about political separation, so those of you who know about American and African history, they know that there was definitely racial separation going on for a very, very long time. So the black people were separated from whites in all public areas and buses and restaurants and so on and so forth. So that would be separation, basically saying, well, we don't want anything to do with you and you stay in your place, basically. But I think exclusion and separation is pretty much the same thing. And then we have inclusion, which is nowadays the approach that we want, or that people tend to want. So it's not, well, it works like integration does, basically, but then you would also make sure that the ethnic minorities are included into every aspect of life, that they have the exact same chances, the exact same possibilities, the exact same duties than the people of the host country. So basically mixing them in such a way that you cannot differentiate between people from the host country and the ethnic minorities anymore. I guess that's what many people want, or what many people see as the solution to many problems, or to, well, problems, but well, probably easier said than done. So integration and inclusion again kind of go together, but then inclusion would be the perfect cases where everyone is equal, basically. Whereas in integration, the ethnic minorities are still a smaller group, integrated, but still among themselves, with all the benefits and drawbacks that staying among your own people brings if you're living abroad, if you're not in your home country anymore. Yeah, and as I said, inclusion, everyone is part of everything, shares the same languages, doesn't only have to be one. The idea of inclusion would probably also include, like, I don't know, using lingua francas or being able to communicate in more than one language. So that's what the idea of ethnic, or that's how some people say that ethnic minorities in a country should be treated. Can't think of any examples where inclusion has worked perfectly, really. There's a lot of countries where integration has worked perfectly, but then inclusion, well, I think it's still a bit further away, the idea of like completely including people and not just integrate them. Good, what else? Oh, now we are at describing photographs. Grand, why can I not backshift? There we go. So, as I said, last week we were at describing statistics, which is the more theoretical thing. You can, easier for those of you who like to study vocabulary and kind of show off their vocab skills at the oral exams, because in graphs you have a lot of like core vocab that you kind of can rely on and base your presentation on. In photographs and cartoons, it very much depends on the visual that you get. Usually, and that's an important thing, people have a certain idea in mind. They want to convey a certain message. in the first place when the photo was taken or when the cartoon was drawn. So there's always a message behind every picture and every image that you will be given in the exam. That's the good news, because usually it's a very clear message that gives you, you know, a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of ideas, a lot of good input. But how do we go about describing photographs and cartoons? First of all, I would, or well, of course, not only I would do it, but that's the general way of doing things. Identify the type of visual first. So what do we have? Always kind of pretending or thinking that your examiners do not know the visual that you have in front of yourself. Of course they do, but already the type of visual that it is kind of creates some kind of expectations. A photo is different to a cartoon, and a cartoon is different to an infograph. So already by saying, well, I have a photograph in front of me, kind of raises some kind of expectations, because, you know, if you have a photograph, it is very likely that you can talk about clothing that the people wear, facial expressions, if there's people in the picture. If you have countryside, if you have like a monument, you can already place it and say, well, the photograph was taken in this and that country, I think, because it features, I don't know, Golden Gate Bridge, whatever. So a photograph, sorry, a photograph already automatically gives you some kind of information. And so does a cartoon, because we all know how cartoons work. Cartoons usually give us some sarcastic message, or they're trying, or they are funny, or they are, yeah, as I said, sarcastic. So already the type of visual kind of raises expectations in your audience, in the examiners in this case. So yeah, I would definitely mention the type of visual first. So photographs, cartoons, infographics, but they're kind of a mix. What else can you have? Yeah, I think that's mainly it. So identify the type of visual first. If it is a photograph, but also a cartoon probably, is it a black and white thing, or is it a photo in color? Just, you know, for mere information. Also give sources if you have them. Sometimes photographs have sources. I don't know, if you get a photograph that was taken by a photographer that works for the National Geographic magazine or something, you already get a hint in what direction the photograph is going. It probably does have to do with animals, landscape protection, global warming, whatever. So sources also tend to give like hints or steer the whole thing into a certain direction. If I were you, and that's my piece of advice now, I would describe the visuals by layers. Layers are Schichten in German. Either from bottom to top, or vice versa, starting at the top and working your way up to the bottom, or from left to right or right to left, because you want to evoke a picture in your audience, even though they know what the picture looks like. But still, if you're doing a simple presentation in class or something like that, you want your audience to be able to imagine the photograph that you have, or the visual that you have in front of you. So, as I said, try and give some system to the whole thing, give some like structure to it by, you know, starting at one place in the picture and working your way up and down, or from left to right. Important. In picture descriptions, we tend to use the present progressive tense for the simple reason that it gives some life to the photograph. So if there's people in the photograph, you kind of want to, like, the photograph was taken in the past, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be in the picture, and you want to kind of bring it closer to the present by using the present progressive tense, which we all know is for things that happen at the moment. You kind of enliven the picture a little bit. So use the present progressive tense and don't say there are two kids in the picture who play, I don't know, in their parents' garden, whatever, but who are playing, because, you know, makes it a bit more interesting, kind of. E is probably the E is probably the most important one. Photographs were taken for a reason, and they were also chosen for a reason to be the visuals in your oral exams. So identify the message. What is the central message of the photo, of the cartoon? What is the point? Like, why was the photo taken in the first place? Why was the cartoon drawn, and why was the caption given to the cartoon in the second place? They always do have a message, so you'll never get like a cartoon that is totally random. They'd always criticize stuff. They would always try and be funny, sarcastic about something, and hoping to get across the point. So yeah, what is the central message? From there, you can also start and speculate a little bit, easier in photographs than in cartoons. If you have kind of a proof, or if you think that you have a proof of when the picture was taken and in which places it might have been taken, then do so. Speculate. The more speaking time you get, the better it is. If it is an old-fashioned, like if it is a vintage photograph, you might just as well speculate and say, well, the car kind of hints to, I don't know, 60s, 70s America. If there's a Golden Gate Bridge or parts of it somewhere in the picture, you're quite safe guessing that the picture was taken in America. So from the central message, you can kind of make the connection to time, place, and whatever else strikes you as important in the picture. Let's have a look again. I try to make it a bit smaller so that you can see it in one screen. First of all, type of visual, very important. Is it in black, white, color? If it is in color, describe it a little bit. If it is important, like if the color doesn't play any role in the message of the picture, you may just as well not talk about it. But if it does, do so. Also describe the people. Are they happy? What do their facial expressions say if there's people in the picture? Describe by layers for mere structural reasons. Use present progressive, maybe the most important piece of advice, and identify the central message and work from there. Elaborate on the central message, and usually the central message gives you a lot to talk about. You can then make connections, like in a mind map kind of thing. You have the central message in the middle, and then you can work your way through everything that you know about the topic, basically. So let's see if I can do it. I was trying to find a picture that has to do with ethnic minorities, but then it is quite hard to, like, doing a Google picture search on the keyword ethnic minorities doesn't get you very far. So I decided on racism because it's kind of related, really. At the end of the day, having aversions against ethnic minorities is nothing else then. So yeah, I guess that we are safe to say that this photograph was taken on a soccer pitch. We can totally agree on that. I would probably start to describe what I see. So in front of me, I have a photograph in which you can see a lot of people. It seems to be two different football teams, two different soccer clubs, as they are wearing different jerseys, or jerseys of like different colors. We are in a football stadium, quite safe to say as well, probably before or after a soccer game. The football players are holding up a banner that says FIFA say no to racism. So this picture was taken on the occasion of the initiative that the FIFA Soccer Football Association took against racism, as there is a lot of racism going on in football still, always was and always will be. So the players are holding up this banner. From what I know about football, it's a Serbian football team and an African one. I think it's a team from Mali, by the way. Those of you who watch the World Championships will know. So we are in a soccer place, and the most striking thing in the whole picture is the big blue banner that says "Say no to racism," and also has this iconic light blue football person in a circle that kind of became the I don't know, icon of the whole Say No to Racism movement, which was very popular in football for a while. Yeah, I guess that's what I would say about this picture. So I was trying to place it somewhere, which is pretty obvious. I was trying to find out the central message. There is a white football team, the Serbians, versus the black football team, the team from Mali. I guess it doesn't really matter if you don't know like who the football or which team the football jerseys belong to. You don't have to, but you can still identify it as a white team and a black team. And the message on the blue FIFA banner says everything anyway. You can also include some own knowledge if you happen to have it. So those of you who know about football might remember the campaign. There was a lot of very, very famous football players joining the campaign as well. Be it European football players, be it American football players who are a little less famous, African football players, mainly Europeans. And they were doing this campaign. You can also add some additional information to pictures if you know something. And the second one is a cartoon. Can you see? Yeah. Okay. I will try and kind of talk you through the visual again. So this is a cartoon, it is not a photograph. We are definitely in some kind of meeting room situation. In the, or close to the left-hand corner, we have the sign of the United Nations, which means that probably they are the heads of some very important international states are discussing a problem. Very likely the problem of, or the refugee crisis, or the problems that the world has with ethnic minorities in their countries. We see a big door where there is a big doorman standing, a big bouncer standing. This is where the cartoon also has its caption, and it says no state or religious group by that name has been invited or accredited to the meeting, sir. That name refers to a suitcase that a person who very much looks like Mahatma Gandhi is holding in his hands. The suitcase says tolerance, so the message of the cartoon is that tolerance is maybe not one of the key concepts that is discussed in such political meetings, that people in such political meetings talk about everything else but tolerance. So it's a criticism of how the big organizations of the world that the United Nations is an important part of, how they deal with the immigrants that come to Europe or that come to, I don't know, America, wherever. So, well, tolerance basically isn't allowed in, it's refused entrance by the doorman. So the central message is that in political discussions, tolerance usually doesn't have any role, or isn't given any important role. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I was trying to identify the message, also describing what I see. I guess the message of the cartoon is very clear, and so is the caption, but I think the cartoon would already work also without the caption. Only the bouncer and his, like, the gesture he makes with his hands, and the figure in the foreground would kind of like very telling. So yeah, I guess that's everything. Let's see if there's so my word file's over. That was it for tonight. I hope that I was able to give you some ideas on how to present visuals, be it photographs or cartoons. I hope I was also able to like broaden your vocabulary on the topic of ethnic minorities a little bit. I will see you sometime soon. Thank you very much and good night.